Hi, it's Bumble. Welcome back to my channel. Feeling a little bit sleepy right now. I just finished watching this movie. I watched it with my friends. It's weird. This is a movie I remember watching as a kid, but I didn't have it on DVD. I don't think so. My dad claims that we did, but I don't remember us owning the DVD. But I still remember watching it as a kid anyway. I remember I liked it as a kid. I didn't think it was super amazing. I realized as I watched it now, because it's been a couple years, what I mostly remember, or what I mostly had liked back then, I think still now too, was the stuff towards the end, the scenes that take place in Trunchbull's house, and Matilda getting her powers was the stuff that I remembered, because I think that's kind of where the movie really picks up. I feel like it's really slow at the start. I understand why, because you have to, Matilda's background is supposed to play a big part in her character of how her parents treat her and her developing her psychic powers, from her family ignoring her and kind of her gaining her own she feels so powerless in her family, and then once she gains her psychic abilities, she's kind of able to put people in her place. I had misunderstood some things, I guess, from when I'd watched this movie as a kid. I had thought that the Wormwoods had adopted Matilda, and I remember I was saying to my friends, I'm like, why did they adopt this baby if they weren't even going to treat her as a family member? But I had misunderstood it, because the first scene you see is her as a baby, and then she gets taken home. I think I'd misunderstood that scene as they went to a hospital, picked out a baby, and then took it home. I think also because Matilda, she gets adopted by Miss Honey at the end, and she says something about oh, I got these adoption papers from the library or something, and I've carried them with me since I was 6 or whatever. So I thought that meant that Matilda had been adopted, and she carried around papers to be adopted by another family or so. I always thought it was kind of weird she was always carrying around adoption papers, I guess. But that turned out to be pretty convenient for how things ended up in the end. But yeah, no, I think they're biological child and stuff, which is so weird to me, because I get that she's the youngest out of the two, but the boy, I mean, he's kind of stupid and everything. I mean, the whole family is, but they treat him as part of the family. And with the girl, I get that they never understood her, and she's different from them, as she likes to read and not as focused on the TV and whatever, and she's actually smart. But even you see when Matilda's a toddler or something, or even when she's a baby, the mom puts her in the sink and doesn't even try to wash her or anything, and complains about her being messy or whatever. And it's you had another child before this, don't you know? I'd understand, they didn't want kids, and they, if Matilda was their first child and they're grossed out by babies and whatever, and it's all new, and it's I'd get that, but it's you already had a kid, so shouldn't you be a little more experienced with what babies do or whatever? I think the reason I remembered a lot of the second half of the movie more, it takes a while for Matilda to get her powers, actually. I think not just because that part of the movie is more interesting to me, but it's always kind of a bummer watching the beginning of this movie of I think it's just for me of watching the parents just ignore her, besides the fact that they have an incredibly gifted child and not doing anything with their talents, even if she was just more of a normal kid or whatever. It's they constantly just ignore her, and when she mentions about wanting to go to school, I remember thinking oh, they wouldn't have to be around her anymore, and they'd probably like that. They already ignore her anyway. But the dad mentions who's gonna sign for the packages when he get home, when no one's home. What if it's really important packages or whatever, because they send their other kid to school, the son, I don't even remember, I think his name's Michael or something. He isn't even really that much of a character. He's kind of just there, I guess. But yeah, I think watching their mistreatment of Matilda is always just kind of hard to watch. I think that's part of the reason I like somewhat didn't like this movie when I was younger. It was always kind of weird in that aspect. I do like with the camera angles. The camera's really interesting to me with this movie, where it's always shown low because I think it's supposed to be like the perspective, like the height perspective of a child, because like Matilda's the main character, even when she's not always on screen. I think that's pretty neat. A lot of the time I feel like it can come off as like a very creepy movie and stuff, especially the stuff with like Trunchbull or whatever, but I feel like it's supposed to be that way on purpose. Like there's some parts of it that almost would feel like they're out of a horror movie. Like the Choky is like this like homemade Iron Maiden the kids get put in, and I completely mistook one of the scenes where a kid gets put in there as the scene from Despicable Me when the girls gets put in there and they see like red liquid coming out of it, and it's actually just like the juice from her juice box, and I thought that was from this movie, but no. Or like Trunchbull will toss kids out windows, and I think the first little girl that gets like tossed out, she goes right over this fence that's covered in like spikes. It's like pointy at the top. She ends up landing in the flowers though, conveniently, but I thought like, damn, if the throw was like just a little bit off and she landed there, like what a way to start this movie. And even just the school in general, it looks kind of like old and a bit like crappy and stuff. Or especially the scenes later on in like Trunchbull's house, they like very much feel like they're shot like it's a horror movie stuff, and the child Matilda angles and everything do not help with those matters. I remember those parts, they kind of scared me just a little bit as a, or not scared me like, oh, they're scary. I think it more just made me feel anxious, but I think that's supposed to be the point. Especially I remember the scene when like Matilda is still inside of Trunchbull's house, and she there's a part where she has to hide under a table, and the tablecloth gets lifted and Matilda's not there, and then it's revealed she's like on the bottom of the table holding on. I always wonder how like characters can do that. Not just how they can do that, but they do it so quickly in movies when it's like they're hiding on like the top of an elevator, at the top of like a table or something. Like you gotta have some like core strength and stuff. I mean, I know you're like pushing with your arms and legs, but to be able to get yourself up there that fast is like pretty impressive. What else? But I always find the backstory stuff in that house pretty interesting, of like Miss Honey and her dad living in like Trunchbull's house, and I think it's implied that like Trunchbull killed her dad or something. Like it gets pretty dark. I mean, it is a Roald Dahl book, and like his books do get pretty dark. Like I never read Matilda as a kid. I think the only one I read was I never even read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I should have, because I know there's like a sequel to that. I think the only one of his books that I had read was The Witches and BFG. I specifically remember reading BFG. I should have read more of them, honestly, but I like that so many of them have gotten movie adaptations. But anyway, they're like all kind of dark and stuff. Like this movie makes me think of the 90s what is it? The Witches, I think it's called, the one with Angelica Houston. I know that got like a remake recently-ish, I think with Anne Hathaway, but I haven't seen that one, but I remember watching the 90s one, and that, not as like a kid or anything, but when I was older, and that gets pretty freaky, especially with like the makeup and stuff for the witches. Actually does look kind of scary, and more like on the gross side. Or like I think pretty much any version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory always just feels like weird. Like it's like a weird vibe. I don't know how to explain it, especially because like I grew up with the Johnny Depp like 2005 one. I mean, the original's also kind of creepy. I think they're like creepy and weird, but in like different ways from each other. But yeah, I think out of the like the Roald Dahl movies and stuff, I think Matilda was the one that I had watched the most when I was little. Let me see, what else? I hadn't noticed since last time I watched that Paul Rubens was in this movie. I was the one in the friend group to point it out. But I think that was only because, he's like known for playing Pee Wee Herman and stuff. And I just watched a documentary about him like a couple of months ago. It was my dad's, but it was like him, Paul Rubens, like as himself, you know, where he's like older and stuff, not him like in the PV makeup and costume and stuff. So I like kind of, I think, just still knew how to recognize his face. He doesn't have like he has like a very short role in the movie where he's this like, I think, undercover cop. It's like him and this other cop, and they're investigating Matilda's dad. There's like so much stuff that goes on with this movie. Like the dad, he even takes his son and Matilda to like his place of work where he sells people like really shitty cars, where he's literally gluing them together instead of welding them, and then the cars break down. Like he even sells one to Trunchbull, and that causes some problems for Matilda later. I don't think the mom even has a job. I think it's that she like literally just goes to play like bingo every day or something, and then we don't really learn much from the school. So yeah, there's like stuff with the dad. We see the cops like following around the family and out kind of stalking the house, and even being inside where the mom thinks they're like boat salesmen or something. I remember I was kind of, I think, a little scared of Matilda's parents when I was younger. Like, I didn't really watch a ton of stuff with Danny DeVito, because I know he also, like, directed this movie and stuff. But I didn't watch a ton of stuff with Danny DeVito when I was younger. So, like, when I was little, I just associated him as, like, with this movie of, like, oh, he's the really mean dad in Matilda. And then I got older and I saw he was in like all these comedies and other stuff and like Hercules and whatever, and now I think his characters are really cool and I like him as an actor. But I was kind of afraid of him as a kid because of this movie. It's kind of weird to think about too, because then you hear about some of the backstory stuff with this movie, and he's like the nicest person in the world, but then especially the actress that plays Matilda, especially because of some stuff that was going on in her life in the time. But then his character in this movie is like horrible to her. But thankfully the stuff with her parents is like pretty short, you know, and that's when she starts developing her psychic powers. I think that's always kind of just when I pay like a bit more attention to the movie. Well, that, and also, you know, once Matilda starts going to school, I think it also gets more interesting. Like Miss Honey is a really nice character. She lives in a cottage. I need to go back through the movie on my own at some point. There was a part when Matilda goes to her house, and there's this really nice shot where they're both like looking at the cottage or something, and I wanted to paint it. I tend to paint movies. I mean, not movies. I do paint stuff from movies, but I've noticed I tend to paint cottages from like movies and anime. I don't know, I've been getting more into that lately. She has a nice little house though, and then eventually she gets to take back her like actual house, the one that like Trunchbull lives in. I should have paid, I think maybe because I was tired or something, I should have paid more attention to the backstory stuff between like Miss Honey and Trunchbull, because it was pretty interesting. I was kind of like vaguely paying attention, but I always find that like one of the more interesting parts of the movie. But yeah, when Matilda goes to school and you get to like meet Honey and Trunchbull and the kids and stuff, I know Matilda makes friends with these two girls at the beginning. I don't remember her actually being like friends with anyone though. The other students are just kind of there, and there's at least like 4 that get tossed out the window at some point. I think the scene at the school I always remember though, because it wasn't even like creepy, it was just really gross with the way it's shot. I always had like conflicting feelings on it, is when that kid, I think his name's Bruce, Trunchbull forces him to eat like an entire chocolate cake in front of the whole school, which isn't that many people, by the way. It's like a very small school. And the way that film's shot is like really gross, especially because he has to eat the cake with his hands. But on the other hand, it's like this like chocolate like devil's food cake type cake, and it looks absolutely delicious. And it's always such a weird scene where I think like, I want to eat that cake, but it's also like, ew, the way this kid's eating it. It's not really like the way he's eating it. I mean, it is a little. It's just the way the camera is in that scene just makes, and the way it's like edited makes it more like icky. And then he actually ends up eating the whole cake, and the kids cheer him on. But that's always like a weird scene. I like that the kids eventually get to like punish Trunchbull and stuff. There's a part like Matilda continues to freak out Trunchbull with her powers, and the kids all start throwing their lunch at her and they end up chasing her out of the school. I think it's kind of cool. I mean, the stuff that Matilda does definitely helps with like freaking out Trunchbull, especially when she starts like pestering Miss Honey about like, hey, what are the names of like these people in your family and whatever, to like use it against Trunchbull. But I like that all the kids end up kind of defeating her together, because it wasn't just like Matilda she terrorized, it was like everyone even before Matilda got there. It was kind of funny watching this movie with friends, because we'd see the scenes of like Matilda using her powers, because she, at first she's kind of, I mean her whole thing is like using them against people, not for like evil or anything, but just people that are like horrible, need to be put in their place, but also like people who mistreat her. We kept joking about like that she eventually grows up to beat Carrie. I mean, it's like a little similar in a sense of like these two like bullied people that use like their psychic powers against their tormentors, except Carrie goes like the murder route, and Matilda, I guess, psychologically tortures people with like her telekinesis and stuff. I always thought that was such a cool ability. I think that was one of the reasons I was interested in this movie as a kid. I've always like, I think if I had a psychic power, that would probably be the one that I would want, of being able to like move things with your brain. That sounds really cool, because I know there's other stuff like telepathy, of like being able to read people's minds. Reading people's minds sounds terrifying to me. I would hate that. But telepathy sounds pretty cool, of just like moving things around. One of my favorite scenes in this movie, especially when I was a kid, is when Matilda's trying to like practice her powers when she's still like at home and stuff, and she's home alone, and it's that like dance scene where she's dancing around and she's moving around all the things in the house. I always thought that was fun. I need to look up the soundtrack for this movie too, because whatever songs in there, I thought for that scene, I thought it was pretty cool, and my friends were like getting excited about it too. And then there's a scene later on that's like really jazzy. I think when they like the kids finally confront Trunchbull or something, I was like, why is it so jazzy? Like this is out of like a video game or something. But yeah, I like the dancing scene with like Matilda and all the like furniture and like the way it moves around and stuff. It reminds me of another movie I talked on the channel a while ago, Escape to Witch Mountain, because it's like a similar scene where it's like kids with psychic powers playing around with like toys and making things like move on their own and whatever, but it's like with puppets instead. I always just think that's fun. It's like those are like the only two movies I can think of where stuff like that happens, because like being able to use psychic powers, I imagine you'd probably have to do a lot of serious things, or like Matilda or Carrie where you're like using them against people. But I like the idea of just, like doing funny shit with your abilities like that. It just sounds really fun to me. What else? I think that's pretty much all I want to talk about. Also, because I'm like kind of a bit sleepy right now, so I'm sort of rushing this a bit. But I just wanted to talk about some of the things I thought were memorable, or I liked, or like things I noticed this time around. Because I've seen this movie like a couple times already. It's been a couple years though. It's a good movie. I always forget that it's from like the 90s and stuff. I think it's from like 1996, I think. But yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on Matilda. Alright, bye bye.